All right, well, our topic today is consciousness, and it seems like I have to talk about this at least once a year, whether we need to hear about it or not, because consciousness is such a big topic in Unity. I talk about it every year, and I decided, instead of trying to come up with a real clever title, I'm just going to call it Consciousness 2014. This is the 2014 rendition of consciousness. When our co-founders in Unity, Charles and Myrtle Fillmore, when they were just getting this whole thing started back in the late 1800s, something new and exciting was happening in the world. The world was witnessing the birth of modern psychology. You've heard names like Sigmund Freud and Carl Jung. They were the pioneers in Europe. And in this country, we had people like William James and James Mark Baldwin, who were just as important, although they don't seem to get the same kind of press as the other two guys did. They were studying the human mind in new ways, and as the rest of the world started to learn about their discoveries, the word consciousness became increasingly popular. So that was a big part of the world that Charles and Myrtle Fillmore were in when Unity was getting started. And if you read some of our early Unity books, articles by the Fillmores, or especially Emily Cady and others, you're going to see the word consciousness come up over and over and over again. We use it a lot in this movement. Think about all the ways that you hear the word consciousness used. We say things like Christ consciousness, higher consciousness, there's prosperity consciousness, and then there's lack consciousness, there's error consciousness. You'll hear about spiritual consciousness, sense consciousness, it's all consciousness. I could go on, but you get the picture. It's a well-used word. So well used that it can be a little bit confusing to people because it's reached the point where it doesn't mean just one thing, or so it seems. Here's a quote. One of the people that thought it was getting kind of overused is a fellow named George Miller. He said, "Consciousness is a word worn smooth by a million tongues. Depending upon the figure of speech chosen, it's a state of being, a substance, a process, a place, an emergent aspect of matter, or the only true reality." The word can be used in all of those different senses, and so is it any wonder that it can get to be a little bit confusing to people. Okay, so what is consciousness? We're going to answer that question in just 20 short minutes this morning. Something that philosophers and scientists and mystics have been arguing about for ages. But I did stumble across an interesting definition that I've never heard of before, and it's short enough to go on a bumper sticker. In fact, it is a bumper sticker. Here's the definition of consciousness: that annoying time between naps. It's one way of looking at it. That's one way of looking at it. And in Unity, of course, we have a short definition that you hear a lot. We say this, we say that consciousness is the composite of all the ideas, thoughts, emotions, sensation, memories, knowledge held in mind, both conscious and subconscious. That's pretty good. I think it's a pretty good definition, but I have to say again, it's only partial, because what we're dealing with there is only the content of the human mind. Us, our experience of mind. And yet, isn't that the place where we always have to start? That's always got to be the starting place. Our entire experience of this life that we have is totally dependent on the thoughts, the emotions, the memories, the information that makes up what we call our human consciousness. But is that all there is to it when we use the word consciousness? Is consciousness limited to our human experience? And I'll tell you, that's the question that keeps coming up over and over for me. That's kind of the cutting edge of my quest. What is the meaning of consciousness before there was any life in the universe? Not just human life, but any life at all. What's the meaning of consciousness before any of that happened? We know to a fairly high degree of certainty that our universe is close to 14 billion years old, which means that for billions of years there was no biological life form because the only things in the universe at that time were hydrogen and then helium. And that may sound like a kind of limited menu, so to speak, like not a lot was going on at the time, just hydrogen and then helium, but the possibilities from that going forward were boundless. Hydrogen fused into helium in billions of stars, and that's when we started getting all the rest of the building blocks of life, things like oxygen and carbon and so on, so we get plants and water and eventually life and eventually self-aware life and eventually this conscious human life experience that we have. So why should I conclude that my experience, this human experience, is the only experience? Again, what is consciousness apart from this human perspective that I find myself in? Well, I think we've just witnessed that. I truly believe this. All I can do is step back and contemplate the fact that everything that's gone before in the course of 14 billion years has combined to produce this experience that we have that we call consciousness. And when I take that perspective, I have to conclude that maybe this experience that we're having is just another step in an ongoing process. It ain't over yet. It ain't over yet. What we see each step of the way throughout the course of billions of years is this amazing and awe-inspiring demonstration of creativity, even when there were no human minds that were part of the process. I once read something, someone described this moment-to-moment creative process as blending the past with the possible. Blending the past with the possible. A human mind is not required. However, what is it that guides this blending creative process? And this is where words become less than adequate. Words kind of fail us. There's a lot of words that we can choose to describe this process. And whatever word we choose, we could pick God, we could pick mind, universe, consciousness, spirit. We have to be careful not to create it in our own image and project our human traits on it as if our experience, as if our perspective is ultimate and final. The great philosopher Alfred North Whitehead, he said that the universe is the creative advance into novelty, the creative advance into newness. And someone took that definition and said, well, spirit is the creative advance into novelty, the creative advance into that which is new. So, the universe is fundamentally creative. Even without us, the universe is a creative and dynamic force. It moves forward. It expands. It always moves toward something new, new combinations, new possibilities, and to me that's exciting. That's something I want to be a part of. I want a life that's open-ended and filled with these possibilities that are continuously presented to us from moment to moment. Whether you're a scientist or a philosopher or a spiritual seeker, the true joy is in the search. We discover new things, which always leads to a new search, and that's what makes life worth living, at least for me. So how does this make our lives better? How does knowing this make our lives better? Well, for me, this is a perspective that assures me that no matter what kind of challenge we face as a species on this planet, as long as we're involved in a sincere effort to ask the big questions and keep looking, we'll be able to meet any challenge, knowing that something new, something dynamic, a creative solution, again, these boundless possibilities are being presented to us if we just open up our eyes and be aware of them. Something is going to emerge from our collective efforts. We're always going to be presented with possibilities. That's the way the universe works. That's the way it's always worked. Once upon a time, a couple billion years ago, life on Earth consisted of various kinds of life forms that we would probably call today bacteria. And one particular species of bacteria started doing something terrible. It started releasing toxic gas into the atmosphere that killed off every other form of bacteria. Take a guess what that toxic gas was. Oxygen, right? Horrible, terrible oxygen that killed off everything else because it was toxic to them. Never been around before. This has been called one of the greatest and most significant extinction events in the history of the earth. And yet what happened? We adapted. Life forms came into being that figured out ways to use the oxygen to metabolize it, and on we go. So here's where it gets interesting though. The bacteria that did this terrible thing, the cyanobacteria that released all this toxic oxygen into the world, it had no choice. Didn't know what it was doing. Wasn't malicious. They didn't know they were killing all of the other life forms around them. It wasn't intentional. Sure, life adapted, good things came from that, and you might say without that great extinction, life as we know it would never have happened. There was cause and effect, but the bacteria, a bacterium, isn't aware of that. We're different. Human beings are different. We have the burden and the privilege of being aware that our conduct has consequences. And then we get to decide what to do about that. That's a big deal. That is an aspect of consciousness that makes our human experience unique in the universe. This is where morality and ethics comes into the picture. With our level of awareness, with our level of logic and our ability to reason, comes huge, huge responsibility. Our actions have consequences and we're responsible. How are we supposed to deal with that? How are we supposed to live? That's why we have all these different holy books around the world. All these different religions, different schools of philosophy trying to answer that same question. And the question is, how then shall we live? What is the best way for us to cooperate with that creative, dynamic force that's at the foundation of the entire universe? How do we deal with the blessings and the curse, in some ways, of consciousness? This awesome power to shape our destiny and the equally awesome responsibility that comes with it. Well, the answers that we get from the different holy books and the different religions and the different schools of philosophy are different. They're sometimes contradictory. And I kind of want to boil it down to some kind of an essence. And, that's not something that I can do alone. Sometimes it takes a poet. Sometimes it takes an artist to capture what that essence might be. There's a guy you may have heard of. His name is John Legend. He gave the commencement address at the University of Pennsylvania just this last Monday on the 19th. And I'd heard of him. I'd heard of some of his music. I knew he was a popular singer-songwriter, but I didn't really know too much about him. And pop culture is so often an easy target for our snark. You know what I'm saying? It's an easy target because we can call it shallow, materialistic, narcissistic, self-indulgent, frivolous, and so on and so forth, things like that. And all of that is true to an extent of certain things that go on out there. But John Legend, the singer-songwriter, call him a pop star, gave a commencement address to over 3,000 young people getting ready to head out into the world. He gave a commencement address about love. Here's what he said. He said, love is a pretty radical notion. It means your daughter or son, your neighbor's daughter or son, and the daughters and sons of people who live thousands of miles away all deserve the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. It means we let go of fear and see each other's humanity. It means we don't see Trayvon Martin as a walking stereotype, a weaponized human. We see him as a boy who deserves the chance to grow into a man, even if he makes boyish mistakes along the way. It means American lives don't count more than Iraqi lives. It means we see a young Palestinian kid not as a future security threat or a demographic challenge, but as a future father, mother, and lover. It means that the nearly 300 kidnapped girls in Nigeria aren't just their problem. They're our girls too. It's actually quite a challenge to love humankind in this way. Isn't that the truth? It's a major challenge. For all the problems it can create, human consciousness brings something into the universe that is special and unique. It's challenging, but it calls us to nothing less than our evolutionary destiny. The key to thriving rather than just surviving. He uses the word love in a way that I can relate to because it's radically different from the way it's used in our popular culture most of the time. It's not an emotion. It's not a feeling. It's a choice. It's a decision that we make in consciousness. A decision to set aside the personality and the ego and to bring everyone into our circle of caring and compassion. So that's the message that 3,000 young people received last Monday on a football field in Pennsylvania, and that's what we mean by raising consciousness. That's how it starts. The creative advance has always existed. It will continue to exist in the absence of human beings, should that happen. If the earth is obliterated, the universe will continue on its merry way with unlimited opportunities to blend the past to possible. I consider this creative advance to be a form of consciousness. I'm not saying it's any better or worse than our human experience that we call consciousness. It just is. It just is. It works. The most important thing is to realize that we are one of the end results of that process, and we get to perpetuate, participate in, and expand consciousness in a way that's unique and creative and which presents its own challenges, responsibilities, and opportunities. By right of consciousness, we choose the kind of reality that the human family is going to experience. Personally, I prefer the experience that's based on that radical notion of love that John Legend was talking about. That's one choice we can make, and I think that's a real good one. And I think if we finally meet the challenge, if we really get it, I think someday, perhaps in the not too distant future, Memorial Day is going to be about distant memories instead of something that is immediate. So until that time, let's keep our consciousness heading higher and higher, and that radical notion of love that John Legend was talking about.